This is the Note Closer Show, where you get the latest developments in distressed note investing and learn the secrets of how you can control millions of dollars worth of property for pennies on the dollar. Get educated and entertained by someone who has closed thousands of deals and lives to support you in achieving the same. Now, here's your host, CEO of We Close Notes, Scott Carson.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Note Closer Show. As always, Scott Carson, excited to be here with you today. I'm excited to have a guest joining us from all across the sea a little bit. I like to say he's hungry in Hungary. But our special guest here is a buddy of mine I've met a few months ago and really love what he is doing. I believe what he's doing can add a lot of value to you guys out there. In a couple of ways. I think we all as entrepreneurs, especially so now with everything that's been going on over the last 6-7 months, and entrepreneur mindset in individuals, we all struggle anyway. Sometimes we carry the torch, sometimes we're the oddballs, we're the one percenters, we're the people that are out there doing things differently to get ahead in life. Maybe it's against the grain, maybe it's against the norm for the people that you're around, your family, things like that. And so I'm really honored to have this cat join us here today, Tibor Nagy. He is a former architect turned lifestyle entrepreneur who, after following the conventional path of going to school, getting a degree, getting a good job, and trying to run in the rat race, decided to think outside the box instead of trying to fit into that. He's a dedicated mindset and performance coach, certified as an Erickson professional coach, and he is the host of the Mindset Horizon podcast, and just an amazing guy. I was honored to be a guest on his podcast a few weeks ago, and really honored to have him today. So good. I guess it's good afternoon for you, Tibor, wherever you're at over in Hungary today, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's over 6 p.m. Scott, thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you, and more importantly, I'm super excited to serve your audience.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because a lot of people, us entrepreneurs have a tendency to stick together. We're a little bit of the weird. Going through and getting your degree in architecture, I'm sure you still love architecture, otherwise you wouldn't have gotten a degree in it, right? But let's walk through that shift, because our audience has a lot of professionals on there that are doing something. They're doctors, they're dentists, they're working the 9 to 5. And then they realize they don't like that and they want to make a shift into something in entrepreneurship. So let's talk about kind of that mindset that you went through and the timing for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big journey, and it started about 4 years ago. And as you were talking about this as an introduction, something came to my mind, and it's a quote by Robin Sharma. And he said, What's the point of being successful if you're a success according to society, but you're a failure according to yourself?
Ooh, hang on a second. That is a good quote. Say that again for everybody here. I want you to repeat that. That's a good one.
Yeah. So what's the point of being successful if you're a success according to society, but you're a failure according to yourself?
Mm.
And this is something that Robin Sharma said in one of his conversations. I don't know if it's on the internet out there as a quote, but it stayed with me since then. And I heard it about 3 years ago. Actually, he was one of my biggest impacts. I started reading his books and stuff like that about 4 years ago when I was thinking about entrepreneurship. And I became really passionate about this personal development aspect of the entrepreneurial journey, like who you need to become as a person and what mindset you need to cultivate in order to be able to follow through on your goals and dreams. And, I started this transitioning about 4 years ago in my mind. And at that time, I was living in Hungary, and I was very unsatisfied as an architect here. So I had a master's degree. I felt I was very underpaid, even though I was working for an international company where I actually had a company car and stuff like that. But I felt my salary was very low, and I was always playing with this idea of moving abroad, because I knew, for example, in Europe, in Germany, I could, earn more money as an architect, as an engineer. And I was playing with this idea because I could speak English and I could speak German to some extent. And before I moved out to Germany, I focused on improving the German language and skills, and eventually I moved out. And I think the transformation happened in Germany. because I started to work there, and it took me about 1 year. A lot of challenges, as you can imagine, with the language. I couldn't really express myself, especially not at work. And I had one focus, like learning the language and being able to reach my full potential as an architect, the potential that I had in Hungary, speaking the Hungarian native language, And I went through this, difficult times. And when I reached my quote unquote destination, I started to earn the money that I wanted, and I could speak the language. I was basically looking for a new challenge. And I think I've always had this growth mindset, which means that I was always looking for challenges in my life. And Germany was a challenge. And when I became comfortable with the language, with the German language, and I could work there as an architect, and then eventually I became a project manager responsible for my country, Hungary. I could become, I was very proud of myself. And actually that changed my belief system in terms of what's possible. And on the Mindset Horizon podcast, a lot of times we talk about confidence. And I think that experience shifted my mindset, shifted my belief system around my belief in my abilities of what I'm capable of, right? Because before that, I had many limiting beliefs. As I looked back, I became more aware as I had this reflection on this journey, but I was limited by beliefs such as I am less than the Germans because I was born in a smaller, less developed country, and so on and so forth. We can go deeper into that. But more importantly, in Germany, I kind of like had this phase when I was looking for a new challenge. And I asked myself, what do I really want in the long run, right? So what do I really want to achieve? Who do I want to become? Because, and more importantly, in the corporate world, what I felt is I was limited. My potential was limited, and I couldn't really see myself there in the long run. So I can also say that it became boring. The job became boring after 1 year. So, in the beginning, it was always really exciting. I needed to learn a lot of new things and learn into the job and so on and so forth. And after one and a half years, it became boring. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, after I finished university, I was working in the corporate world for 5 years, and a job, I had 5 different jobs in 4 or 5 years in 3 countries, because eventually I moved to Austria. But I didn't stay longer than 1.5 years. And I was like, why is that? So something is not good here. And I was thinking in the long run, and I was asking myself, who do I want to become? And then how could I see myself in the long run, really? What is the vision that I can commit to, so to speak? And interestingly enough, I saw myself as an international speaker. I saw myself as someone who speaks in English on stage. And at that time, I wasn't that good at English because I wasn't really using the language, even though when I was 15, that was the first time when I've been to the US. And since then, I wanted to master the language. And, in my professional life, I was always chasing international job opportunities. Mm-hmm. And that was also one of the reasons I moved out to Germany, hoping that I'm going to get more international job opportunities there. But it didn't happen. So we were very focused on the German market, and I needed to use the German language. And I was dreaming about becoming international, using the English language, becoming a speaker, telling my truths. And at that time, it was very, blurry. I didn't really have a specific vision, but this was the point where I started thinking, what's next? What's the bigger challenge? And at that time, I started thinking about entrepreneurship. And as it happened, I started reading more about marketing and business, and started listening to personal development and business podcasts, also because I wanted to learn the language. And I was just exposing myself to different channels in English. So I was reading the books in English, podcasts in English. And it happened to me that, the personal development aspect of the entrepreneurial journey for me became more interesting, because I saw that, in order to be successful or an entrepreneur, you need to kind of like grow into that person, grow into that identity so that you can execute on your goals, right? Because at that time, my identity was I'm an architect. So I couldn't really imagine myself as an entrepreneur. And when you have the identity in place, you follow through on your actions. So this is what Tony Robbins talks about, or he has this quote, you know, human beings absolutely follow through on who they believe they are. So if you have this identity, you know, I'm this real estate guy, I'm this entrepreneur, you can take the action steps because you are driven by your identity. So I became really interested in that. And this is where I started my transition, so to speak.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I think you highlight a couple points there. I think a lot of people, we have the idea, hey, we're going to get a job, we're going to climb the corporate ladder, and we think new positions or greater responsibilities are going to really fill that drive sometimes. And a lot of times it's an empty promise, I guess you could say. Yeah, it's great to make more money, it's great to have a cool job, but a lot of times it doesn't fill what we're looking for, that drive, that creative juices. And that's why a lot of people, have hobbies and things that source of there. But it's still that point where you're like, in climbing, I'm not finding any type of personal fulfillment. And you can hear that coming through you, especially when you're dreaming in a foreign language. That's usually the sign that God's telling you, hey, you're not, what you're thinking is, I've got a bigger plan for you. And I can only imagine, I've dreamt in Spanish sometimes where everybody's speaking Spanish. And I'm like, I speak un poquito. But that's a different thing. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they struggle with that. You mentioned a second ago, getting to there and trying to figure out, well, I'm seeing this, but I don't know how the heck I'm going to get there. I'm seeing myself doing this. And I think a lot of people, that scares them from taking that big initial leap to leave their job, leave their career to start something new, because like, I'm not worthy of that. I know a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with imposter syndrome. They get out and they start doing something, and it's not the whole fake it till you make it, but they're like, I don't know. People fear failure, and other people feel like I don't want to fail people. I don't want to be, everybody's human, and some people have a hard time coming to grips with that. I got to leave that. I got to hold on to the secure job because it's got pay everything. Well, we know everything now is not secure, no matter where you're at, whether you've got a regular job or you work for the government. Nothing is secure except really what you do yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was struggling with that. And to be honest with you, 4 years ago when I started one of my favorite shows today as well, Impact Theory, it captivated me. And secretly, I dreamed about something like that, a podcast, a show where I can interview interesting people. I was captivated by that show. But at that time, as you can imagine, I couldn't really see myself doing that. And you grow into this identity, right? So the most important thing, especially when it comes to changing mindsets and changing belief systems, is the action steps. So action steps can actually influence our belief systems, right? If I had never gone out to Germany, I wouldn't have believed in myself and in my abilities to figure stuff out. So I exposed myself to different things, and I got to a point where I could, expand my vision a little bit more and more and more. So that's coming through action steps. So you need to take the steps. My first vision was smaller, right? And one of the biggest problems of people, I think, is that they don't dare to dream big enough, right? Yeah. So, they say that, I'm captivated by impact theory, but I'm just saying, okay, I'm going to do one-on-one consulting practice, and I'm going to have, one person impact the time. And if this is what you want to do, that's totally okay. But just be honest with yourself, right? And, throughout these 4 years, I oftentimes I felt I'm not honest with myself, right? When I talk to people, I was saying that this is what I'm planning to do. And I couldn't have the courage to reveal my true dreams, my true desires, right? That I want to have a show. I want to have a show like Impact Theory, right? And Tom Bilyeu says, he wants to build the next Disney, right? And this is his dream. This is what you have to shoot for, the stars, right? And this is what pulls you toward, and this is what helps you move toward your vision. So I think that's something that people miss, that somehow they don't dream big enough. And there's this term, the fear of dreaming, right? So that's kind of like the first fear that people encounter, especially the people who are transitioning from the corporate world to, let's say, entrepreneurship. The fear of dreaming. They don't dare to dream at all, right? Or they dream small.
Yeah, that's definitely a big thing. They play small ball versus taking it to the next level. I mean, that's the big thing. I can't do that. Well, yeah, you can. You just have to a little bit each day to get to that bigger picture. And if you set small goals for yourself or small dreams, I think we kind of bullshit ourselves into, okay, I'll get to it later. And it leads to procrastination. Whereas if you do have a larger goal, a larger dream, I think it often can motivate you. Like, hey, I got to get up every day. I get rocking and rolling on this. I don't have time to sit around. Or if I'm still working, I've got to make the most of my spare time after hours, or, as like Gary Vee says, 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. time to get stuff done, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, and over time, you grow into this.
Now, with you interviewing so many different people, and you started the podcast after you left corporate America, or did you start it when you were still working?
I started after I left. So there was actually a transition. So basically I left my job for the first time, my full-time job, and then I had an experimentation phase, right? So I was experimenting with different ideas. I was living in Austria, and I took a coach training program. That's when I took the Ericsson professional training. And Tom Bilyeu came to my mind again. He said, don't be afraid to be lost for a while. And many people, I think, especially if you're trying to build something, you're going to feel lost. Yep. Oftentimes, especially in the beginning. You don't know if this idea is going to work. And so I was experimenting with different ideas. I was kind of like lost. And I needed to get back to the corporate world in order to financially, support myself. And that was a time when I felt that that's total self-betrayal in the corporate world, because I went back just for the money, and I was already that desire was already inside of me very much, and I was working on that idea as I was working in the corporate. And then I basically left, and then I started the Mindset Horizon podcast after I left the corporate the second time. And then since then I've been building this.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think a lot of people, I had a coach really first off, and a lot of people struggle with that. They're like, they get going and it takes a little bit more than what they expect. And it's like giving up your dreams. I went through that early on too, 10 plus years ago. I left corporate, worked, started a mortgage company and was an investor. And during a tough time, I thought, well, do I need to go back into banking? I remember going for that interview and then walking out of it just pissed off, because I felt like I was giving up on my dreams. But sometimes you have to put that dream down for a little bit to pay bills. Let's just face it. Yeah. It doesn't do you any good, or any of your tribe or what you want to be homeless and broke and behind all that stuff. We can agree to that, right?
Yeah.
But and a lot of people don't. I think a lot of people don't realize that they're afraid when they leave their job, it's not going to be there. They couldn't find something else. And that's the way that I think a lot of people that are successful, like, well, if I do fail at this, I can always go back to being an architect. I can always going back to being a banker. I can always go back to, working for whoever I worked at before, or somebody else. It's not the end of the world. But I think you learn more about yourself. And I think that second time out, I'm going to ask this honestly of you, and you please be honest. Did you take it a little bit more serious and a little bit more motivated after the second time?
I did. And I was more focused on what I'm going to pursue, so to speak. So the experimentation phase for me was really, I had just had this desire. I want to start something on my own, right? But I didn't really have a business idea, right? And I kind of like started networking. I was living in Austria at that time, and I started networking, right? Because I was like, I need to be in entrepreneurial environments so that I can grow into this space, so to speak. Because at that time, back then, before that, I was in the corporate, and I didn't really know how things how things work, right? So I kind of like quit my job and I was like, I'm going to explore this world. And I attended different conferences. I started networking in Austria, and I started to learn more about how entrepreneurship works, basically, not just through books, but through conversations, through networking. And I didn't really have an idea that was the experimentation. And then I needed to get back to earn more money. And then as I was in the corporate, I was already working on a specific idea. So that time was an experimentation and finding an idea. But it was really hard for the second time when I needed to get back, because again, for me, it was a struggle, sitting in meetings and thinking about my idea, my business idea, and how I want to execute on that, and so on and so forth. So that was a tough time. And yeah.
Yeah. You've interviewed some amazing people with your podcast, and I'm sure you've learned a lot of lessons from that. Is one, or probably more than one, but early on when you started, is there somebody that you interviewed that really stuck to you, that really helped you? Okay, thank you. That really helped you take you to a whole different level, or help you start you off on the right path, or really help change some of the mindset stuff. You know what I'm asking?
Yeah. And it's a great question, to be honest with you, because there was a woman, her name is Tracy Litt, and she's a mindset coach. And there was one sentence that stayed with me, which was, don't believe everything that the mind tells you.
Mm-hmm.
And she was talking about the fear, and she was talking about the voice of fear in your head, basically. And, first step to personal transformation or mindset shift is the awareness, right? So the awareness that we have different voices in our mind. And she was basically talking about this, and that was very much mindset shifting for me. That first step is the awareness that you can separate the different voices. So fear has the voice that tells you, for example, that don't start this business, right? Stay in your comfort zone, because the brain's number one priority is to keep you safe, right? So keep you away from everything that is unfamiliar. And that's, so the brain's number one priority is safety for survival. That's the survival mechanism. And then the second is to keep you away from any kind of pain, emotional, mental, physical, spiritual. And so the voice of the fear tells you that, hey, Tibor, this is not a good idea to be an entrepreneur, man. This is very risky, and so don't do that. So if you can differentiate the voices in your head, that's kind of like the first step, the awareness. And she was talking about this. And what you can do and what people can do is really just, hear this voice if, this is the fear talking to you and trying to hold you back. And on the other side of the equation is that, what do you want, right? The vision, the desire. And so that's the thing that you want to focus on, instead of focusing on the fear telling you stay in your comfort zone. And it's hard because we are pushing ourselves to the limits all the time, right? So I do that every time when I do an interview with English. I'm getting used to the English, but I'm always like stepping out of my comfort zone, right? And yeah, it's an interesting thing.
Yeah, it definitely is, with that lizard survive or flight syndrome that we have, that lizard brain we have.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not good. You're gonna hurt yourself. Why are you gonna do that? You could fail. Yeah, but what if I don't fail? What if I do succeed? It's always the thing that we have to overcome on a regular basis. And everybody has that. You look at some of the like Steve Jobs behind you. He dealt with that too. That book behind you there, exactly. A lot of the big names, they deal with that on a regular, daily basis of imposter or scarcity syndrome out there. Now, you mentioned that when you quit your job, you started networking. What kind of networking did you do? Because I think a lot of people that are listening to, they're working full time, and you said something really good. Hey, your time when you're working is to your boss and to your job and to the company. You don't have a lot of time or energy to go out and networking and rub elbows with other people that are at where you want to be. And that's one of the big things we talk about, is getting out and networking, whether it's in person or online groups. What did you do there in was it Austria you were living at the time? I think you said there. And how did you network?
Yeah, I was living in Austria, but I was becoming very international in terms of one of the communities I've become part of was the Mindvalley Communities, and it's a personal development and also entrepreneurial community. Maybe it's a little bit more focused on personal development. So the founder is Vishen Lakiani, and they organized, for example, an event which is called Mindvalley University, and it's a 4-week event where there are different talks and in entrepreneurship and also in personal development, and you can learn. And I first off, I attended that. One of the first events was the Mindvalley University, and at that time I was already clear on that I want to become an international entrepreneur in terms of using the English language and so forth. And I attended that event first. So I started networking there. And since then, actually, that community was a huge support to what I'm doing, because I could invite, guests from that community on my podcast. For example, Ajit Nawalkha, one of the co-founders of Mindvalley Teach. So or Jason Goldberg, a coach from California, LA. And then, those people were in those circles. And actually, when I started the podcast, I could immediately reach out to them. But to be honest with you, when I first attended that event, I didn't know that it's going to happen, right? I didn't know that I'm going to have a podcast and I'm going to invite those people. I was just planting the seeds, right? And that was the first event. And I was less active, for example, in Vienna, Austria. I was living there in the capital of Austria. But I, for example, joined a community called I Am Good. And that community was organizing personal development and entrepreneurial events in Vienna. So I basically, as a volunteer, I joined that community, and we were organizing different events in Vienna and in entrepreneurship. So that was one of the communities I remember. And in the meantime, I was going through the coach training program, which was actually a Vancouver-based program, but they had partners in Vienna. And so I was going through the program in English already. So at that time, I was very international focused in terms of the language and the communities. So I was expanding a little bit my circles.
Well, that's a beautiful thing. I think it's such a gorgeous thing. I think so many people look just locally, oh, I got to be somewhere local. Well, you're not going to be especially if what you want to do is not have a local large presence, or you want to do something bigger, or you're dreaming in a different language. You've got to figure out and realize, okay, where is that stuff happening? So that's awesome that you found something out. They did have a local presence that you didn't know about before, and you tapped into that resource to get things. And you were coaching. You were being a student and being coached by people out there to help take you to the next level. And I think we all need coaches. I mean, we've got a variety of different coaches for my business, my podcast, entrepreneurship. And I think that's one of the most important things, is getting a coach is somebody that can help you take those steps that aren't blind steps in the wrong direction, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of local, I'm working with somebody on the marketing of my podcast, and we were talking about this, that, being local, I mean, I'm thinking about this, that maybe from a local base, you can be, for example, I live in Hungary right now, and maybe from here, because podcasting is just becoming a thing here, it's not that popular that it is in the US. And, I could become a pioneer, so to speak, here in Hungary. And then if I have a follower here, or maybe people know me, then maybe I could grow more easily internationally. So I love the international aspect. This is why I chose this. But I'm kind of like thinking about, is it worth doing something here and then, becoming known, for example, as a podcaster, and then maybe grow from here. This is something that I'm experimenting with right now.
Now, that brings up a question. There's a lot of people like, well, do I focus locally or do I go nationally? Where do I go? Do I go where the crowd is if it's not here? Is there a big audience? Is there a big podcasting influence there in where you're living at right now? Or is it growing, or what's the answer to that?
Yeah, it's growing. I mean, today I actually wasn't really involved, and someone just invited me to a podcast in Hungarian here in Hungary, and she found me on LinkedIn, and and now I'm planning to partner up with someone, a podcast production company here in Hungary, and I just had a phone call with them today. We were talking about that we're gonna, meet next weekend. I just shortly asked the guy what their experiences were in terms of podcasting, and he said that after COVID, they had many more interests and companies reaching out to them that they wanted to start a podcast. So it's becoming a thing here. It's just not booming that much that it is in the US.
Right.
And it's kind of like it's the time. Now it's becoming a thing. Content marketing wasn't a thing here. It wasn't the focus for companies, right? It's just not. So content marketing is becoming a thing, and podcasting is becoming a thing. And this guy, the founder of this production company, said that they had very positive experiences after COVID hit, and more companies reached out to them because they wanted to do something, during these times, wanted to gain more potential customers.
So what did you do? I want to ask that. It brings up a good point that content is king. I think we all know that you got to put content out for people to be able to find you, connect with you. What were some of the things that you were doing initially to get the word out on what you're doing to attract clients, to attract students? What were some of the key focal things that you're doing, Tibor?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the main focuses is really the content marketing, and I focus on social media and the podcast. So in social media, I focus on Facebook and LinkedIn. On Facebook, I focus on Facebook groups. So for example, for the Mindset Horizon podcast, I created a Facebook group. I want to invite the listeners there in order to get some feedback, in order to be able to connect with them more easily, survey them, because I kind of like want to know their pain points and desires, right? So in order to create better content, this is one of the first things. And also to provide services or products or anything that I might want in the future. And that's the group for the Mindset Horizon podcast. And there's also a group for the new podcast, the Podcast Interview Mastery Show. And I just want to connect with these people so that I can see better what they need, right? Because on social media, it's hard to, sometimes I feel it's hard to connect with people and get some feedback. But I focus on Facebook, and on Facebook mainly on my private page. So not the Facebook, not the Mindset Horizon Facebook page, but the private page. This is where I share the most content, and in the Facebook group. And then LinkedIn, I also focus on content marketing. So I share content, and I use a tool. It's called LampPod, top secret tool, with which you can just boost your views on LinkedIn. And you can check that out if you want, lamppod.com. Top secret idea.
I think you email me the link on that one to add it in there. I'm going to take a lecture because we love using LinkedIn. And that's a great thing. And you brought up that you talked to somebody who found you there locally, but found you on LinkedIn and connected with you. We met through a Facebook group originally, connecting and talking, and now we're part of each other's networks, which is a beautiful thing. And I think a lot of people are scared for that ask. I think you mentioned, hey, I'm looking for guests. I reached out to you, and I was like, I was on your podcast. We had a chance to talk. I researched what you do. I was like, oh, I got to have you on mine, here's my network, and leverage each other's networks to help us both grow in a positive fashion. Because I think that's one of the most important things these days is that while many of us are stuck at home by ourselves or with our family, sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
You've got to tap into those networks to help your business grow, whether you're seasoned, and you didn't mention that, or if you're brand new, especially brand new. The faster you can get your network growing and a bigger network, the more opportunities you have versus trying to be a private, spy, a James Bond where nobody knows what the heck you're doing. You can't succeed in anything trying to be secret about what you're doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, networking on social media is one of my biggest focus, to be honest, on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. So if I didn't have a LinkedIn account, or if I didn't share anything on LinkedIn, I wouldn't have been found by this woman who does this podcast here in Hungary, and that's going to be my first interview in Hungarian, which is really exciting. But that's really what I like about social media, that
Yeah.
I really engage also in other Facebook groups, not just my Facebook groups, but I go to podcasters' Facebook groups and I comment, I read, and I also survey the audience. For example, when I started the new podcast, I surveyed some of the Facebook groups, right? I posted some questions connected to pain points. So that was very strategic. And when I launched this podcast this week, I actually personal message texted all those people who left a comment on my posts, because those are potential listeners.
Yeah.
And I was very focused on that, right? So before I started, I surveyed them. So there's a lot of things you can do, and I think networking is really, really, really important.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up for our listeners that are listening to this or watching this, and you may be thinking, well, Scott, why are we talking about podcasting on a note investing podcast? The reason I brought this up is I want you guys to listen to what he's saying here, is that LinkedIn, Facebook groups, and you said a very, very powerful tool. You messaged everybody who commented on your post. You've used LinkedIn to leverage to find other people. That's one of the biggest things that you do, and it's easy. And those are free things to do. All they do is take a little bit of your time. But the fact that you've reached out, the days of sending a personal thank you note are really kind of gone. You don't have address, and then you'd be sending a lot of international postage as well too. Get pretty expensive doing that. But that little bit extra, hey, thanks for commenting, or how can we work, or appreciate that. I think that's a lost art of that personal one-on-one touch, and I think it's so valuable. And it's really the key. People will post something and then they'll expect, oh, it's going to go viral, a million likes or a million comments, but they never go back to touch base with that audience. And you're exactly right. Those people that are taking the time to comment, can be your future clients. They're your future, in our case, the word future investors to deal with, future listeners, future deal source. That's a very powerful thing to do. And it just takes time and a little bit of energy to do that. And most people just don't do that.
Yeah, what I think what we miss on social media is the engagement. So you have to think about social media as the real life, right? So you don't just post something and wait that someone is going to reach out immediately and be your customer. You have to start a conversation first, right? And for example, one of the people I texted because of my new podcast actually listened to the podcast, and she sent me a voice message that she has been podcasting for 3 years and she was waiting for this podcast. She was waiting for this podcast to be born because she wants to become a better interviewer, and this is what she wanted, right? So, and this can be an ideal customer as well, right? What it takes is just send a private message if you see that person is actually a potential customer because maybe left a comment or liked your video. Some people don't leave a comment, right? So they just like. What if you just reach out to them? Hey, how is it going, right? I mean, you have to talk to people as if it was reality, because the engagement and the conversation have to happen first, right?
Yeah, and that's the whole point. I think a lot of people struggle with is not only that follow-up, but also thinking about, what do I post? What do I share if I'm brand new? I'm not that interesting. And I'm a big believer that, okay, if you're not that interesting, then go find something that is interesting. Go find an article, a periodical, a video, something, and share that, but then share your opinion about that. We've got a thing going on right now with a coaching challenge with our students, and that's one of the things I challenge them to is go to their LinkedIn, post an article, and they get points for posting that article, but they've got to give their comment. What's going on with this article? Why do they find it important? What's the point being? And that takes it versus just sharing, where people are like, okay, they'll read it, but they may not comment on it. But starting the dialogue, priming that pump for people to comment and either agree or disagree, and having a friendly conversation versus kill you, I can't stand you because you have a different opinion kind of thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there could be other things that hold people back. For example, fear of being judged. but you know, what I did was, if I believe that I provide value to my audience, I'm ready to post anything. And I usually focus on providing value. So I'm not sharing, you know, dancing cats and stuff like that. I'm focused on the value aspect. So
Right.
how can I bring value to the community? So I have to be sure that I bring value and I talk about something valuable in those videos. And I share my excitement as well, because, you know, people might be interested, and I want to actually include them in my excitements. So for example, I look at my Facebook group as my kind of like quote unquote family, right? And I want to share these stuffs with them, and hopefully they are excited too.
Yeah, that's the thing. You never want to you don't want to surround yourself with somebody who's a Debbie Downer, who's upset and nasty. That doesn't anything. Excitement attracts people, and people can sense your excitement. They can sense your enthusiasm, and that attracts people to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's nothing worse than being negative, Nancy, and down. That will repel people against you. So that's why I tell people, like, if you're creating content or video or doing something and you're in a bad mood, don't. You're dialing, making phone calls to asset managers, don't be in a bad mood. Go do something else. Come back later when you're in a good mood and smile. A smile just comes across, like right now, your smile, man, boom, megawatt blow-watt torch there on the video, because you're excited. And same thing here. You can't help it but attracted to that. And people appreciate that, especially in such a negative world we live in these days. It's so important to be that bright light, that lantern or that blowtorch that people can look to for motivation, enthusiasm, and really kind of, I hate to say this, but suck a little of that energy off you to help brighten their day.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And what I realized in one of my latest videos, that I actually smiled. I don't usually smile when I talk about something, but I started smiling, and I was like, that's actually a good thing to continue, because people want that, right? So people want this enthusiasm and some motivation, as you said. Yeah,
and we all, and that's not to say that we don't struggle, because we all know everybody struggles on a day in, day out basis.
Yeah.
What's one thing that you like to do, or two things that you like to do if you're having a rough day or you're struggling? What's kind of your keys to overcoming that? Do you do something to help you boost the energy and kind of get you back on track on your journey?
Yeah, it's a great question. So what I do every day is I ride the bike in the lunch break. So basically I have a half an hour when I go down and I ride the bike. That's my exercise, because it helps me clear my mind, and that's the only reason. But one of the things I found really helpful is, in the morning I journal, and what I really like to write down is my visions. And the way I do it is I put down, you know, it's 2020 or 2021 April. And I write down what I'm experiencing as if it was happening right now. So, you know, I had visions of living in the US, and I wrote it down, and I wrote it down as if it was happening right now. And I think it's really, really, and then after that, I meditate on that. So that's kind of like a more spiritual practice, but I write it down, and then I visualize during meditation. And this is how I train my brain to focus on what I want to experience in the future, right? And not focusing on the things that, for example, don't work. So this is a practice I found helpful for me. And this is what I do in the morning. But otherwise, exercise is something that I do to clear my mind.
Yeah, that's a big thing. You can change, by moving, you change your physiology altogether by getting up and moving and getting the energy and flowing and getting those dopamine levels, even if it's just jumping up and getting things rocking and rolling, or going for a walk in the morning or the evening, or riding your bike, just moving. I think a lot of people get trapped into the gyms aren't open, I don't have this stuff. Well, you know what? People were exercising without gyms way before we had them, like going out for walks and riding their bike, right?
Yeah, I jump before the interviews, actually. So I do some push-ups and I jump a couple of times. So that
okay, Tony Robbins, there you go, the little like trampoline.
Yeah, but it's true, because I want to get into a different state. And it's so interesting, because after 1 minute of jumping, you feel different, right?
Yeah.
So you might have been doing something like an exercise or something that requires focus, and then you were a very relaxed state. And then when you have an interview, you want to get into a more exciting state. And then with jumping and push-ups, I just get into that. And that's one of the practices I do before interviews all the time. All the
Now,
time.
Are you cranking
I
like
need that.
Cranking out like 100, 50, 20? Drop down and give me 20.
four times 10, just for the state.
There you go. That's good. That's simple. You know, that's a simple activity. You know, nothing wrong with that. That's beautiful. I love it. A lot of people need that out there that is listening out there, because I think sometimes we get so bogged down in like trying to get through mud, and our brain sometimes can be mud, mind blocks, problems. And sometimes stepping away, doing something like that, it'll present ourselves, whether it's in English, Hungary, or German, the opportunity will present itself to us on that. With what you're doing now with the interview podcast, how to be a better interviewer, because you're doing that for selfish reasons, which is nothing wrong with that. That's part of the great thing about being a podcast. A lot of times we get people on that we want to pick their brains for our own intrinsic features. But I think learning to ask better questions leads to better answers and better solutions for us. Would you agree to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And just one secret to the listeners, I was thinking about starting a podcast because I went through the coach training program, and in the coach training program, we learned about asking skills and listening skills. And I was like, I was thinking about a medium and how I could use technology to spread the message. And this is how podcasting came about. And in the interview show, connected to your question, questioning is an asset, absolutely. And what leads to great questions is the curiosity. But more importantly, what leads to great question is the ability to be able to listen and be present. So we are in this conversation. It could be a coaching session or any kind of conversation. If you are not present with someone, you are not listening, you can't ask great questions and you miss the cues, right? So you want to listen to those little things that you can ask as a follow-up question, right? So someone might miss something that you would be curious about, and then you ask, but what did you do there, or why did you do that? And that person is not missing that because on purpose. It's just he forgets to mention, and then you can ask follow-up questions based on that listening. So listening is, I think, one of the most important things. And it's hard because during interviews, we are a little bit distracted by technology. I don't do, for example, video interviews. I just do audio only, and then I just listen. I just want to focus and listen. I realize that I get into a flow state more easily. I don't have purposes with video right now.
Well, I've done video longer than I've done audio. So that's part of the reason I love doing video, because it's a different animal. And not everybody, especially here in the United States, when we only have a quarter of the population listening to podcasts, and we have YouTube and video that way. I've got a little bit older audience that spend more time on video than they do on audio, which is okay, but I'm trying to hit multiple platforms. But you said something really good there. You're paying attention. This is one of the things that when I'm talking with people, I might have one or two questions written down to ask as a maximum. I'm not a big fan of 7 or 8, crafted questions, because then you stop listening. You end up going by those questions and missing those little verbal cues for something else. And if something pops up interesting in a question, I don't want to have to, I got to go to the next one. I don't have time to go back to that. I think that's what makes the difference between an okay interview and an amazing interview. When you're talking with coaches or people that you're picking their brains, those little nuggets that maybe nobody knows about, but people will hint at it, and it's just a matter of asking that question can lead to a whole new, like, oh my gosh, that makes a lot of sense. Now I understand. Let me get past that mind block.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is how you can go deeper, right? So many people who come on the show as a guest, they have been interviewed a couple of times, right? Or many times. And then you want to be able to ask the questions they have never been asked before, or probably, right? And the way you can do it is by listening and then asking the follow-up question based on that listening. So yeah, it's it's a skill that can be developed over time. And I think it's really interesting. And back to your point on outline and questions, I always did a lot of preparation because of the language. I was really insecure. I mean, my first interview, as you can imagine, I planned out everything, but as it turns out, the conversation goes all over the place. So it's not going the way I planned it, basically. And what I realized that I can conduct better interviews if I just focus on listening. Mm-hmm. So what you said is, I would highly recommend, if someone is a podcaster, for example, that you have a North Star for a guest. So you had a North Star for me, what you want to talk about, and then maybe 2-3 bullet points that you want to go through. Otherwise, you just listen and ask follow-up questions based on that listening.
Yeah, definitely. We could sit here and chat all day, Tibor, but we're coming to the end of here. You know, I know we could because we've done it before. What's the best way for our audience to connect with you, to find out more what you're doing? What's the best way for people to connect with you? They're listening or watching this.
Yeah, absolutely. The best way to connect is my website, mindsethorizon.com. And people can check out the podcast. There's a section, How to Podcast. I also have a free ebook on that, so people can check out that as well.
Perfect. And listen to the podcast, everybody. Great stuff out there. Great interviews. I loved it. I've been binging it, definitely. In a couple of different, hey, no problem, man. Thank you for being a great guest and sharing and being honest and sharing your journey. I think a lot of people need to hear that. People are going through that. They're struggling and need some more to turn. And sometimes we don't have the tools provided by our entrepreneur, our business or our company or our community. We've got to go out and find the tools ourselves. And you really outlined what you did to help take you to that whole different level. And so we look forward to your continued journey. Look forward to when you come over to the States. Hopefully not too long, we can get together and have a beer in person some point, huh?
Absolutely. Would love that.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you so much. Well, guys and gals, you heard it here. Don't be afraid to go out on your own. Everybody struggles as an entrepreneurship when they're leaving their job or leaving something they're used to doing and striking out in that path alone. You're not alone. You've got people that have done it out there. You just got to reach out, network, connect with other people in a variety of different fashions. It doesn't have to be somebody in your backyard. It can be somebody across the globe that you can reach out to, just like our relationship is blossoming here between us two guys here. So go out, take some action, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you all at the top.